Aguirre. So I'm gonna be talking about seaweed biobanking with the nonprofit organization Kelp Arc. So if we can advance, please. Yeah. So Kelp Arc, like I said, nonprofit organization. We're developing and maintaining kelp gametophyte seed banks. We call it seed banks because they're technically not seeds. They're just a life stage of the seaweeds that is microscopic and easy to keep around. We're also doing kelp-associated microbes of West Coast species. We're doing this for opportunities in restoration or also for aquaculture. So at Kelp Arc, we have like three main components. We have biobanking, we have aquaculture, and we also have breeding tools. So first off, I'm gonna start with the aquaculture, and I don't know if I'm blocking this side, but I'll do this. So we have some aquaculture systems that we have 500 gallons, and then we have a couple of 210-gallon tanks. We have some water tables and a reservoir. You can see in the back of the picture there. And we have these available for just biomass growth, research collaborations. We also have it for aquaculture education or just for commercial partners. So that's like one of the main pillars we have. And then if we can go for the next one, the main thing, my very biased opinion, because I am the seed bank curator, so it's the seed bank aspect of our work. So a seed bank, you might refer it to like a land seed bank where we have a bunch of seeds and they can be in these jars and then they can be kept for many, many years. So what we're trying to do is what you see on the lower portion there, we have the gametophytes. That's what I call the seeds. So these gametophytes, we keep them in these small tubes right there. They're like 5 milliliters, so they're really tiny. We can keep many of them for a long time. And that's essentially what we're trying to do. Currently, we have, actually, go for next. Yeah, so our seed bank collection, it's an alliance of different institutions that are maintaining this XC2 seed bank. So with these institutions you see down here, so Felipe Alberto in University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, Sergey Anoushka at USC, and Ray Lewis at Wheaton College. So we have a seed bank collection of 2,500 individuals. And yeah, so this is what we currently hold in our seed bank. This is just an example of a couple of the species we have in our collection. So we have feather boa or egregia. We have bull kelp, Nerecistis, Alaria marginata over there. We have some Pelagophycospora, which is a really cool one. Grows really, really deep. Giant kelp, Samondaria, and then also a really cool one, the Posteltia palmiformis, sea palm. Yeah. And then the third kind of pillar, like to call it, in Kelp Arc, is that we also have the ability to do breeding with these gametophytes that we have in our collection. So, land crops have benefited from breeding since, we started like domesticating all these plants for agriculture. And so we're trying to catch up with seaweeds and aquaculture. So some things that we're thinking that is important to do and traits that are important to breed for are like thermal tolerance, just faster growth, or maybe some specific bioactive compounds that are of interest. And just here you see that's a male and a female gametophyte. That's kind of what they look like. Okay. Another very important aspect of our organization is that we're also doing outreach and education. And we engage with people, students from schools, college, and universities. We talk about what we're doing, the importance of kelps, and just the challenges of climate and anthropogenic effects, kelp forest restoration, and aquaculture. Yeah. So kind of like more new updates coming from our organization. We now have some red seaweed, Gracilaria parvispora, in our collection. This is the first red seaweed that we have in our collection. And we just started this release of these carpospores, which are like these guys right over here, I guess. Yeah. And then, we're like growing them now into tetrasporophytes. And secondly, we also are now in the process of receiving some Laminaria farlowii from commercial partners, so that we can also get to grow these ones for aquaculture, which is like a new promising species to work with here in California. And that's kind of like the update I have on like the seaweed parts. So now I will pass it on to my colleague, Dr. Emily Aguirre, who's going to be talking about the biobanking of kelp-associated microbes.
Thank you, Michael. Can you guys hear me? Okay, cool. Okay, so just like humans, kelp need their microbes as well. They need a good microbiome so that they can grow healthy and be fit out in the world. Next, please. Okay. And there's actually a growing amount of research that indicates that microbes can actually cycle pollutants from the water, so they can help in taking out excess nitrogen and phosphorus, and also helping kelp fix carbon from the atmosphere. They can produce antimicrobials that deter pathogens and prevent biofouling. We know some cases of microbes in red seaweeds being able to induce spore production and trick seaweeds into releasing spores. They have been used as growth aids in the past. We know that many of the microbes that are associated with seaweed also can have a hand in producing natural products, which are products that are not necessary for an individual to have, but make it available for the community and boost up the fitness of the whole community. And also, we know that microbes participate in consuming the polysaccharides that kelp exude out. And so that way they keep kelp nice and clean on the surface. Next, please. And so at Kelp Arc, we paired up with Julia Schwartzman over at USC, and we went ahead and took some DNA sequences from kelp and separated the kelp genome out and only focused on the microbial aspect. And we were able to reconstruct 1,794 bacterial genomes, as you can see here. And you don't have to really pay much attention to this figure, but what I'll tell you is that the colors indicate the different types of functions that we noticed in the genomes of these bacteria. And one of them is amino acid usage, which means that usually when bacteria take up nitrogen and they're using it in that way, that is shown there, that means that they're spitting out ammonia. And so that's why we know that bacteria help kelp get their nitrogen. But there's other uses as well, other than the basic metabolisms. We know that in those genomes, there was production of antimicrobials, antifungals. We know that some of those bacterial genomes were able to also sequester heavy metals like mercury and arsenic. We know that they produce ectoin, which is and resorcinol, which are compounds that are widely used in acne medication. And but then that all begs the question, what's in the seeds, right? Like, what's in the seed? Is there a seed microbiome? Next, please. So we thought about that. And one thing that came to mind, and in collaboration with Natalia Jimenez at Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, she's studying this as well. She took those genomes that we assembled at Kelp Arc and then compared them with genomes she assembled from fresh kelp blades and found that there was differences in the microbes. So that tells us, okay, something in the seed bank media that we're using is promoting growth of certain taxa. So that means that some beneficial microbes may actually be reduced in the seed banks, right? And it might be microbes that like to eat complex sugars because we keep them in the seed banks for about 6 months and we don't change the media. So that means that there's an accumulation of complex sugars, which means that the microbes that are probably going to grow in this media are going to be microbes that eat complex sugars, which skews the microbiome composition towards a different composition than what they have out in the wild. Next, please. So we decided, all right, let's just figure it out. Let's try to culture these guys. And we paired up with folks over at Cal State Dominguez Hills with Dr. Erin McCauley. She's a great colleague, a biochemistry professor. And she gave us 2 awesome summer interns. And we went ahead and isolated a bunch of bugs, basically from kelp. We took some from the seed bank, and we took some fresh from San Pedro, from the port of Los Angeles. We also got some fungi, surprisingly. Didn't expect that, but there was a fungi that kept coming up in all the samples. Next, please. So what do we see happening in the future, and what is kelp art going to do, right? Well, more omics analysis. We need to see the differences. So I would like to go out there and sample more fresh kelp and really look at our cultures out in, and compare them and see what's there, what's not, what's missing. We want to look at how some of the bacteria that we already have can possibly aid in growth. So we're going to conduct experiments soon. We're going to conduct experiments with stressors. So we're going to pick some of those bacteria and expose them to either a more acidified ocean conditions, or we're going to expose them to heat and see how well they do with or without their microbiome bacteria. And one thing that I've been thinking about is a lot about is maybe we need to change our media formulation. So maybe we can make media that keeps the gametophytes happy, the seeds happy, but also doesn't change the initial wild microbiome that they had. We want to keep that wild microbiome the same. We don't want to skew it towards a different community. And we also want to look at how some microbes that we have in culture may actually induce spore formation in brown kelp. Next, please. And this is our team. You met me and Michael. Hayden is over there upstairs. She's our newest hire, and she's tabling. And also our CFO, Nina Nugina, and Sergey Nushten, who is our CEO. So we don't have time for questions, unfortunately, but you can come see us upstairs and then ask all your questions then.
Great, perfect. Usually it asks like a question about finding things, so that's okay. Yeah, you got the timing? Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second presentation of the industry session. My name is Sally Aaron. I work with a company called Marine Biologics. Marine Biologics really was started thinking with the seaweed industry in mind. The whole purpose of our company is to actually figure out new end markets for seaweed, new customers, new applications, new innovations that's using all of the great seaweed that's coming from the industry. In terms of my background and kind of the lens that I bring, I've been actually in the raw materials B2B commercial side of things for about 20 years. So I've worked in food, I've worked in cosmetics, I've worked in flavors and fragrances, pest control, all kinds of kind of different things. And really over the last kind of second half of my career, I've been focusing on really new to the world innovations. So things that maybe have not even had regulatory approvals yet and have had to go through that regulatory process and then get introduced to customers, consumers, things like that. So what I really obsess about is what does the customer think? What does the consumer think? And how do we take those understandings and use that to think about innovation? So as I was thinking about what to present today, I'm actually going to share some data that's really about a lot of new product introductions that have been happening over the last few years. So hopefully it's data that you haven't really seen before. And then we'll talk about what that really means when you're kind of thinking about markets in the future. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so who saw the Whole Foods 2025 trends that just came out? Anyone? 2 people. And I know you saw it, Anoushka. Anoushka works with me at Marine Biologics because she's the one who actually sent it to me. So yes. Okay, so every year Whole Foods does a trend prediction where they say, you know, what are the cool things that, that they think are going to happen in the next year. And so as you can see over there, one of their top big food trends that they see is plant-based aquatic ingredients. And then they show, you know, kind of fun pictures. So Whole Foods is really in an interesting position to make these trends because not only do they see things that are on the shelves in their stores and they see, you know, what's moving, what's selling, they also have all of the different customers or who are coming to them and are pitching. So they also get to see all the cool new innovations that, you know, a year ahead of time, people are coming to try to pitch to get in on their shelves. So they see it in a couple of different ways. So they're in a great position to see that. So go ahead, you can put the next slide. But what I like to look at is, you know, to me, that's, you know, okay, great, aquatic-based ingredients. A lot of those things you saw in there were things that have kind of a marine positioning. But I like to go a little bit deeper and think about, like, well, what does that really mean? So what you're seeing on here, and I have to apologize, there's a typo on here that they wouldn't let me fix. I was moving too quickly when I built this slide. But this is showing new product launches in food. It's food and pet food, I will say. From 2019 to 2024. And what I did is, in this database that I use, I can go in and I can actually look at the ingredient declarations. So every single food product that's sold, you can see, you can flip it over, you can see all of the ingredients that are in there. So I was able to go in, sort new product launches, and see who's labeling things with like kelp or algae. There's all these, like, you can see kind of down on the bottom there, all these different synonyms for algae. And so what you're seeing here is products that were actually launched over those years. Now, it doesn't mean they were successful. It doesn't mean these products actually stay in market. This is not representative of volumes or revenues or anything like that. This is just simply showing you new product activity. And what you see is those big high bars where you're seeing, you know, macroalgae, seaweeds, things like that that are getting claimed as an ingredient. We're not talking about food additives, just like things that are labeled as seaweed. You're seeing it a lot in pet food. And actually, when you dig deeper on that number, that's actually pet food supplements is where you're seeing a lot of that activity historically. You're also seeing it in supplements, and that shouldn't say Asian ready meals, that should actually say sports nutrition. And sports nutrition actually is, you know, supplements and sports nutrition is often an early indicator of activity, where they're, you know, they kind of do things kind of early and often and kind of move ahead of things. So for me, that was pretty interesting to see. But you see, like, all those other things, they're like tiny, 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 right? And to me, those are kind of like pockets of opportunity where we should be looking to figure out how we can do innovation to kind of edge up those markets. So that's one way to look at things. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is like really, really awful and ugly, but I left it that way so that it would just look super confusing. I decided to go deep for you and just look at supplements, for example. So what I can do in this database is I can go in and I can look at it and say, okay, in supplements, how are these getting positioned? Like, what are the different things that people are launching into the market with different positionings, and how is that kind of sorted? And what I want you to look at is I have it in bright red up at the top. But things that are positioned around marine ingredients, it's tiny. It's tiny in terms of new product activity. And so, you know, I don't want to like burst anybody's bubble. Like, I know that we all love seaweed, but there's a limited universe for how we're going to position things with, you know, seaweed and a marine kind of algae ingredient, right? Like we you know, a lot of us live on the coast. We're like obsessed with the ocean. But, you know, I live in San Francisco, right? Like, we're a bubble. Like, things are not, you know, in the rest of the country, it's not like it is in San Francisco. So, you know, to me, like, really, most people are like buying botanical and herbal supplements. They're buying vitamins and minerals. But guess what? Macroalgae has a ton of minerals and it has a ton of vitamins, right? And so what I want you to start to think about in terms of, you know, new product launches, new product activity, it's not that we need to position things always around like the fact that it's seaweed. We have to think about, what do we have that's in seaweed that addresses all these things that we know consumers are interested in, and that customers, I always distinguish between consumers, you and me. This is like me eating something. Customer is the person who, if in a B2B lens, is the person who's actually like producing the product. So as I sell something, I think about my customer who I'm selling to, who's buying my 5-kilo bag of raw material, and then they have a consumer. So when you're thinking about these markets, you have to think about, what does their consumer want? And then how do you position that for your customer? So, you know, this is just to say, like, if you just think about like seaweed as a raw material with a marine positioning, you're missing out on all this other opportunity that you could be positioning your product around that solves a customer's problem, that solves a consumer's problem. Next slide. So what I then did is I went back, I looked at all of those same launches, and I looked at the compound annual growth rate of those new product launches and what problems were those trying to solve? Like, what were they actually trying to claim? And here's all the things that people are actually caring about right now, that people are launching products in dietary supplements. It's mental acuity, like mental health, you know, being sharp, performing well. People have problems sleeping, insomnia, huge problem. Lots of products getting marketed around insomnia. Energy, energy has been a huge one for like forever. Everybody's always wanting energy. And guess what? Everybody's tired of caffeine, right? There's other things that you're looking for. Weight management, huge. GLP-1s right now, people are launching tons of products that have to do with protein. Okay, maybe seaweed doesn't have protein, but like, what do we have in seaweed that might help you deliver a product that has more protein in it, right? So you can use these things to think about different ways to position your seaweed or your new product. And immune health. Immune health has been a big trend in terms of new product launches, especially during COVID. It was huge, starting to come back down, but people are constantly concerned about how do you keep yourselves healthier, right? All of these things, there's ways that you could either, think about the compounds in macroalgae that can deliver against some of these, or how are you part of like a mix of other ingredients that are delivering against these need states that people want solutions for. Next slide. And then I went back and I looked at food, and this is actually data on new product launches. So, in the last, from January 2021 to October 2024, 91,000 new products launched into just the US market alone. Now, this is across everything. It doesn't include pet food. This is, alcoholic beverages to baby food, things like that. But what I wanted you to see here is these are like really kind of high level positionings, like the way things are kind of counted in this database in terms of like what's overall important of these new products. And I just want you to look at that right hand side. Convenience. Everybody just wants things to be convenient. I know everybody's saying like processed food is terrible and it's going to go away. Guess what? It's not going to go away, right? So like if you're selling a packaged seaweed product, how do you make it more convenient? Like, all the kids love the seaweed snacks, right? Like if you have something that's, a seaweed salad or whatever, how do you make it easier for consumers to eat it on the go? Like on the go is huge. That's a big trend, right? So just think about that. Or that bottom one is called health passive. That one is like reduce salt, reduce sugar, reduce carbs, keto, things like that. So, these are also big bucket consumer trends that as you're launching a product into the market or you're thinking about how to serve customers, like those are big trends that you should be thinking about that have nothing to do with a marine positioning. But if you keep that in mind, that helps you think about how do you solve these problems and make macroalgae as an input ingredient, or even an end product more appealing to an overall bigger population of consumers. Next slide. And lastly, I would say, then that opens up big giant markets, right? In food, when you start to think about it in a much bigger way, then you're like, hey, I'm playing in that plant-based nutrition space that is huge. I'm cleaning up labels and making that, making things simpler for my customer. Or, I'm playing in the, food as medicine, huge trend in the food industry right now. And macroalgae is perfectly positioned. It's got all kinds of bioactives in it, right? Like that, we should be playing squarely in that space. And it doesn't have to be a marine positioning. It can enable all kinds of other different claims that I talked about earlier. So, just keep all of these things in mind that, for macroalgae to be successful and to kind of take over the world, we've got to think bigger than just a marine positioning. We got to think about all of these kind of bigger, broader trends and how do we position macroalgae as a solution to deliver against those. That's it. I think that's my last slide. Thank you very much. Okay. Any questions? Sure.
So, do you see that growth coming from natural sources like the ocean, or farm, like maybe even inland sources? Or
I think it's going to be both. I think that there is going to be room for all comers, and I think a lot of it is going to be around what's enabling some of these different claims. So I mean, I don't have an opinion, here nor there. Like, you know, is the consumer really going to be like, ooh, this was grown in a tank and it wasn't grown in the ocean? Like, I don't think anybody is really going to make that distinction at this point. I just don't know if that's really going to be a differentiator.
More like, where's the capacity, right? You know, like, we've heard so much about permits and stuff. This festival.
You know what? If you talk to the farmers up in Alaska, and they are permitted to do a ton up there, just as an example, you know, what they're looking for is demand. So they're kind of like, look, I got 5 acres planted. I can plant 20. Show me the demand. And so that's, you know, that's what our company thinks about all the time is how do we figure out how to generate this bigger demand? And, you know, and just the premise of this talk is that I think we got to go much bigger than just a marine positioning. We got to like figure out how to solve consumer and customer problems. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I think that, you know, we're in this world of, you know, as much as I kind of like poo-pooed like the whole conversation around processed foods, it is a big topic. People are talking about that. And so I think that there are interesting things inherent of, like, historically, macroalgae have been really refined down to like, you know, single ingredients. A lot of them are being thrown under the bus right now. So I do think from like a broader kind of whole foods perspective, I think seaweed has a right to play in a lot of those markets. I think it's just figuring out like what exactly that looks like. So I think that that's kind of one instance. I think in terms of, I think there are just solutions that will like ultimately fall out of favor over time in the food industry, and macroalgae, if it's, you know, if we figure out the solutions right, might be able to come into it. So I don't know. I mean, I don't have a great answer for that because I think it's going to evolve over time. But you know what I would just encourage everybody to do is just like keep an eye on those consumer trends, because that's really where kind of the up and coming innovations are where you're gonna get some ideas from. Yeah. Yeah, so this data was all coming, this was coming from a database called the ANOVA New Products Database. And there's a couple of them out there. There's one called ANOVA, there's another called Mintel, and they track new product launches globally. And like, you know, they'll tell you that they capture like 90% of the new product launches. I think it's probably closer to 50%, but either way, it's, you know, in my mind, it's just kind of indicative. I mean, it's backwards looking for sure. But I just think to me, it's a really helpful gauge of like, okay, what is currently going on? And honestly, like I love this database because you can like click down on it, you can sort by ingredients, you can sort by different positionings. And I just think it's so helpful to see like what's rising, what's falling, and you know, what's kind of falling out of favor, and how are people kind of thinking about it. But what it doesn't show is success. So like, I have no idea of the person, like, if you pay more money, you can get access to that, but I'm not that good. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Who's next?
So again, thanks again to Sally. Yeah. So next up we have Brian Donovan, who's gonna be presenting about an economic and production analysis of seaweed farmers in the states of California, Oregon, and Washington. So please welcome Brian.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. It's wonderful that all of you are here, and this is sort of the first test run of the thesis defense and so on and so forth. So my advisor, Dr. Rafael Cuevas-Uribe, and I, we're very excited to share a lot of the data and stuff we've been working on, and so on and so forth. Thank you much, Sally, for giving a great talk. And so lovely. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. Excellent. My name again, Brian Donovan from Cal Poly Humboldt, just up the street. And what my advisor and I, Dr. Rafael Cuevas-Uribe, and I, what we got into is looking at the West Coast seaweed industry specifically, which is kind of cool. But first things first. So farm seaweed is big internationally, which is kind of cool. And then in 2022, there were 36.4 million metric tons of farm seaweed produced in the United States. So that's, That's a pretty substantial amount of seaweed, and those crops were valued at about $17 billion. So that's pretty impressive. And you can see here, we can look year over year that the aquaculture or farm production of seaweed has been steadily increasing for some time now. Next slide, please. So what the heck is seaweed farming? How do folks get into seaweed farming? What's kind of going on, and so on and so forth. So a lot of farmers, both in the United States and internationally, they'll farm seaweed using long line systems and land-based systems, which something that's really cool. Here in Humboldt County, we have farms that specialize in both long line systems. Cal Poly Humboldt, we've got a cool experimental farm right out here in the bay that some folks may have gotten a chance or opportunity to sort of look at with the Matikit, which is kind of cool. I know the Coral Sea is just right next to us, which is great. It's a great vessel, super cool to take a look at. And we also have our land-based systems where seaweed likes to bubble and sort of propagate in large tanks, and both systems are super cool for growing seaweed. Next slide, please. Excellent. So this thesis is based on seaweed farming in the west coast of the United States. So for the United States, only 700 metric tons of farm seaweed were produced in 2022. And so the United States is responsible for approximately 0.002% of farm seaweed globally. So we're a pretty small percentage. This thesis was centered around the West Coast. So we really kind of wanted to know how the West Coast seaweed industry was doing. Next slide, please. California Dreaming in the Pacific Northwest. Again, there's just a lack of data associated with seaweed farming here on the West Coast. Next slide. If you look at the state of the states with the University of Connecticut, the state of the states is a great reference sheet. We have Anoushka here, which is lovely. And so you can see, again, let's take a look at Washington State, Oregon, California, West Coast of the United States. You're seeing some data points that are missing in terms of farms and production and that kind of stuff. And so the goal of this project was, to sort of, kind of help bridge those gaps. Next slide, please. Project goals. Again, we wanted to determine the type and quantity of seaweed species produced by West Coast seaweed farmers. We wanted to better understand how West Coast seaweed farms operate. And we wanted to talk with the farmers. We wanted to get their opinions and insights on all sorts of cool stuff, their thoughts and opinions. And overall, this project has been a pleasure. It's been really fun to sort of talk with, lots of folks, growing some cool stuff here on the West Coast. Next slide, please. What we did for methods, there are, first thing, we created a farmer contact list. And that contact list in 2023 was super, super helpful. And there were approximately 14 West Coast seaweed farms in 2023. And then farmers, once again, in California, Oregon, and Washington State were interviewed for this project. And then we used a team-designed survey instrument to interview folks, and that was pretty cool. Next slide, please. To maintain confidentiality and privacy, farmers in Oregon and Washington State were combined into one unit known as the Pacific Northwest. And then interviews were conducted for this project in person and over Zoom, which is kind of cool. And then we completed interviews fairly recently, not too long ago, in the spring of 2024. Next slide, please. Data analysis. We had one farm that declined to participate, and then we were unable to establish contact with 2 farms. 11 farms were interviewed for this project, giving us about a 78% response rate and so on and so forth. And then data from 9 farms was ultimately used for this project, and the decision for 9 farms was based on similarities in terms of business characteristics, and again, the number 9 ended up sort of kind of being a good number for us. And then no randomized controlled trials or major statistical analyses were performed for this project. Next slide, please. So let's get into the results. So what are kind of some of the things we observed with this project? There were really 4 main seaweed species that were produced in 2023. So again, we were able to talk to quite a few farmers for this project. Those 4 species you can see, they're Pacific dulse, bull kelp, sea lettuce, and giant kelp, which was kind of cool. And then for California, for 2023, we're looking at 318,000 U.S. pounds. And then for the Pacific Northwest, again, that's Oregon and Washington State, 23,000 pounds. Next slide, please. I like this a lot because we were able, with this project, we were able to determine that California produced about 318,000 pounds, placing us at number 4 in terms of seaweed production here in the United States, which is kind of cool, which is pretty sweet. Next slide, please. In terms of profitability categories, so again, we're looking at seaweed farms, here on the West Coast. 70% of farms indicated financial difficulties for this project. 22% of farms indicated that they were profitable. And those farms that were profitable, you can see right there in green, they were actually land-based farming systems, which is super cool. And you can see 22% of farms, not profitable, and then a lot of folks said not applicable, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. To move on into the discussion section, we're looking at some of the challenges for West Coast seaweed farmers. You can see, quite a few challenges, here on this slide. We're looking at maintenance issues, permitting, other thoughts, all sorts of stuff. But we'd like to really highlight a lot of farmers reported the regulatory and permitting process, remains pretty difficult, especially for new farms. The regulatory hurdles, especially for folks that are trying to get up and going, kind of difficult. And some folks, you can see here, they, sometimes use colorful language to sort of, describe the regulatory process. A blank, amount Everest of paperwork. So, pretty substantial for especially new folks. Next slide, please. Moving forward, thank you so much. Sally gave a great talk, to get us thinking about moving forward in terms of where seaweed, particularly here on the West Coast, is trying to move. Folks, a lot of farmers were talking about industry subsidies, aquaculture opportunity areas, and so those are specific areas in federal and state waters where farms can grow, and where government entities have specifically allocated areas to where farmers can grow and produce their products. Again, Sally sort of touched upon this, which is exciting. Pharmaceutical, nutraceutical, cosmetic applications. So again, we just want to look at new and emerging markets that are pretty cool. In terms of future research areas, with Cal Poly Humboldt and then beyond, we'd really like to get into consumer survey studies, and kind of do more in-depth market analyses. And I loved how Sally was touching upon consumer surveys, particularly. What would folks what do folks what would they like to eat, and where do they see the products that they want to purchase in the future, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. Finally, I'd like to thank a lot of the native peoples that on whose land we conducted a lot of surveys and so on and so forth. And so it's lovely that Cal Poly Humboldt, we have a lot of tribal folks that we interact with, and so it's just nice to sort of acknowledge that we worked a lot on the land of quite a few tribal nations. Next slide, please. Excellent. Thank you guys so much for your patience and time, and my apologies for being a little nervous. This is kind of the first practice kind of run through for the final thesis defense. But thank you so much. We were able to just collect an amazing wealth of results, and I really couldn't have done or gotten this far without the farmers, advisors, coworkers, family, friends. Everybody is just that's where I really get emotional. Is everybody's just worked so hard. So I am graduating in a couple months, so I am looking for full-time job opportunities. So if thank you guys again. Thank you. Here's my email right here. Yes, please. That's a great question. So again, going back to profitability, we're looking at mostly land-based systems, and they're growing Pacific dulse. And so a couple farms have been able to look at market trends here on the West Coast, and they've been able to realize that some folks, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, don't mind paying a good amount of money for Pacific dulse. The average age. I'm sorry. Average age is about 10 years old. I'm sorry. For the ones that are profitable, about 8, 10 years. Sorry about that. Yeah. Another question, please. Yes. That's an excellent question. So I was able to talk to a couple folks here last night at the Seaweed Speakeasy, and oftentimes no. We had a lot of farmers that were saying, Brian, we can't get rid of these products fast enough. Yes, so consumer demand remains difficult, and that's where folks like Sally and other folks come in. We want to get that market sort of excited, and to where farmers can sell all of their products and so on and so forth. Excellent. Quick question. Thank you all so much again for your patience.
Good job, Brian. Good. Well, thank you for that interesting presentation, Brian. Next up, we have Anoushka Concepcion, who's going to be talking with NOAA's role in supporting the seaweed sector. So please welcome Anoushka.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Congratulations. Congratulations on finishing, finally.
Yeah.
I know, right? Feels great, right? Doesn't it feel great?
We all age so much. It's like, oh my God.
No, congratulations. Great job. Hi, everyone. My name is Anoushka Concepcion. I'm a regional aquaculture coordinator for NOAA Fisheries. My territory is the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, so from Virginia up north. But before that, I was Sea Grant Extension educator with Connecticut Sea Grant. So for 14 years, I was with Connecticut Sea Grant and did a lot of the seaweed stuff in my region of the U.S. on the West Coast. So wanted to also acknowledge my counterpart here in California, Celia Barroso, who unfortunately couldn't be here. So she did contribute to this presentation. So I've only been in this position for a few months, so please, if you have any questions about the state of California and how regulations work in this state, I will direct you to my wonderful colleague, Celia. Next slide, please. So I'll quickly go through a bit about the background of the sector, the seaweed sector in the U.S., talk about NOAA Fisheries' role. in aquaculture and supporting the sector, and just leave you with a few resources for more information. Next slide, please. All right, a little bit about seaweed farming in the US. And this comes from the State of the States, which Brian referenced. It's from the Sea Grant National Seaweed Hub, a project that near and dear to my heart. And so a lot of the information is available on the Seaweed Hub's website, so you can go there anytime. The presentation is called Status of the Industry. It's updated annually by all the Sea Grant programs that contribute. It's 10 Sea Grant programs that contribute to this. So really quickly, seaweed sector is a relatively young industry, just really emerging over the last 10 years, primarily composed of cold water kelps, which is grown in more temperate to cooler waters, occurring mostly in the Northeast. Seaweed farming got started in New England. And so that's where the majority of the seaweed farms are. And when I talk about seaweed, it's mostly, again, cold water kelps in open water, not tank-based. Most operations are small-scale seasonal. And there's several reasons for that. But with kelp being a cold water species, it has a very short growing season and harvest season, anywhere between 2 to 3 months. So very, very short, unlike oysters, which is year-round. Most operations really rely on existing infrastructure, which is really, really important. So when we talk about some of the challenges and the barriers, you really need infrastructure to be able to stabilize a seaweed. It's mostly water. You pull it out of the water, it begins to decompose. So you really have to extend the shelf life, and you need infrastructure for that. Current markets, which we're all here, we got to experience some of it, is mostly for food. It's the highest value commodity right now for a lot of seaweeds. So yes, there's a lot of interest in non-food, but then the value goes down with non-food uses, and you need a lot more seaweed to sort of make up the cost of production. But as interest grows, you're all here, we all love seaweed, that's really, as demand increases, then hopefully the seaweed sector will take off. Next slide, please. All right, again, similar slide than from Brian's. But again, this is a quick snapshot and overview specifically on number of landings and number of farms. So you can kind of see how all the states stack up with one another. You can see from this slide that Maine is really the largest seaweed producing state by number of farms, but also in biomass. Something to keep in mind, so we have landings about 1.5 million pounds. That may seem like a lot. But in the state of Maine, they've been working with seaweed for more than 60 years, and it's mostly wild harvest of rockweed, which is mostly used so it's a brown macroalgae, but it's mostly used in animal feeds and for fertilizers. They harvested 60 million pounds of rockweed last year. So you can compare that, just one state producing 60 million wild harvests compared to what's cultivated. There's still a huge gap and a huge difference. Next slide, please. Just wanted to let you know in terms of the growth of the industry since 2019, but this data, so the National Seaweed Hub has been collecting data since 2019 through all the Sea Grant programs. But just in the last 2 years alone, 3 states in the Northeast have seen the greatest growth, mostly in number of farms, but also biomass produced. But it's also important to note that not every state in the Northeast is doing as well. The state of Rhode Island decided to decrease how much seaweed that they're producing because of the excess of biomass that they just couldn't get rid of. And so as a result, and because of a lot of challenges, which I'll go into the next slide, but yeah, they really downsized in the amount of lines that they put out this year. So next slide, please. So here's some of the barriers. And again, this is all from this National Seaweed Hub's website. It's really limited access to profitable markets. Now, while food is high value, it's low volume. It's only a little bit. So that's really challenging for farmers who need to really recoup costs, but I mean, really, they ideally like to make a profit. Something else to note, we import 90% of our seafood, including seaweeds, in ready-to-use packaged forms. A lot of what we import, we don't grow here because it's not native to our coastal waterways. So now you have an additional barrier with farmers trying to compete with the cost of imports, but also species that maybe current users of seaweeds are not used to. So it's starting from scratch and finding new markets, right? So that's very challenging and time-consuming. But I think the biggest barrier, and I think we've heard this throughout this meeting, is the lack of infrastructure to extend the shelf life. That's a lot of investment, that has to go into this component of the supply chain and the value chain, because with a short growing season, for example, with sugar kelp, you want to be able to extend the market access beyond the growing season. And so with infrastructure, that would really assist farmers and processors in any sort of seaweed operation a lot. And of course, there's scale-up challenges with production systems such as nursery systems. Folks need to get juvenile seaweed so that they can deploy on their farms. But again, it's that technology of scale-up that's challenging, but infrastructure has a lot to do with that as well. And of course, always ambiguous regulatory landscape. Every state has their own process, their own agencies, their own regulatory systems. So what's happening in Maine doesn't necessarily translate to California. And that's part of the challenge. Next slide, please. So how can NOAA help? How can NOAA Fisheries help? So really, our mandate is to ensure that aquaculture is expanded responsibly and sustainably, while also balancing our other mandate to maintain a healthy, productive, and resilient coastal ecosystem. We do that through a series of legislative mandates, as well as policies, and also administrative priorities. Next slide, please. And this is all available on our website, too, NOAA Fisheries website. But I wanted to focus a little bit on our priority of regulations and policy. We heard a lot about permitting and regulations and barriers. Well, this is, again, part of the challenge with doing anything in our coastal waterways, because we have to balance marine stewardship, which is our mandate, but with also all the multiple uses. There's a lot happening out in the environment that we can't see because we're above the water. But there's really extensive ecosystems, commercial fisheries that are occurring, military uses, for example, that are happening that we may not know about. And so it's up to NOAA Fisheries and the different offices. Often a professor of mine previously called NOAA an agency of agencies. So it's, excuse me, I'm doing consultations and coordinations between many federal agencies like U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, EPA, to sort of help review applications to ensure that there's not going to be any negative impacts to the environment and the organisms that live in that environment. So we were first created, NOAA was first created through the Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Conservation and Management Act, so the MSA. And that really dictates everything that NOAA does, whether it's commercial fishing or aquaculture or anything else. And part of Magnuson-Stevens was really created to manage commercial fish stocks. But part of managing commercial fish stocks is ensuring that the habitats that those commercial fisheries need to thrive are also protected. So every component of that organism's life cycle has to be protected so that we can ensure that our fisheries are well managed, into the future. Including things like the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act. In the Northeast, one of our biggest challenges is any sort of gear and interactions with whales, because the biggest concern is entanglements. And so with seaweed farming, there are lines, right? And whales can pretty much get entangled in anything. So it's trying to figure out where can we put a seaweed farm or a shellfish farm where it's going to avoid any sort of entanglements or interactions with marine mammals. So that takes a challenge, is understanding what's happening, underneath the waterways. And for those folks that are researchers or academics, you have to fill out that lengthy NEPA form. I don't know if you know. It's a very lengthy, detailed form, and you have to fill out every column and every row. And but that basically sets our process in motion. So it's really not really a law. It's a process that every federal agency has to adhere to. It's not just NOAA, Army Corps, EPA, USDA. We all have to adhere by the laws that Congress established for following this process. Next slide, please. So a little bit about regional aquaculture coordinators. There's 9 of us. Unfortunately, Celia somehow was missing on the slide. But she's there. You can contact her. But really, our role is to help facilitate a lot of these conversations at the federal level. Next slide, please. And now just want to talk a little bit about some of the resources that are also available on our website about general information about marine aquaculture, but also about permitting in the U.S. So I'll just direct you to the overview guide for permitting of marine aquaculture in the United States. It's more from the federal side, and Brian mentioned the aquaculture opportunity areas. That also has a lot to, or applies to AOAs as well. But then there's also not really a guide, it's more of an inventory of state-by-state permitting. But bottom line, in the state of California, you should go to your California regulatory agencies first, or the sea grant programs that can help you navigate through that process. Are most folks familiar with AOAs, aquaculture opportunity areas in California? Okay, so I'm just gonna correct you a bit. It's not really a designation, it's an identification. So really what NOAA is trying to do is implement an executive order in 2020 that said we need to increase our seafood production through aquaculture. So less reliance on imports, and let's start producing our own seafood. But fisheries have leveled off, so we can't rely on commercial fisheries. So the next step would be aquaculture. But then how do we meet that mandate? How do we meet that executive order? And so what NOAA decided to do is say, well, let's figure out if we can go further offshore and try and figure out how we can grow these organisms. But before you do that, you have to do an assessment of what's out there. We're still learning about our coastal ecosystems, but not so much about what's happening beyond the 3-mile offshore in federal waters. So this is sort of like a process that NOAA has been undergoing in the Gulf of Mexico, Alaska, and Southern California Bight to basically do marine spatial assessments of what's occurring in the waterways. And 2 aquaculture atlases, which are basically reports of what was found, is published on NOAA's website. So if you're interested in what's been happening in the Southern California Bight, that report is available for you to take a look at. Now, the aquaculture opportunity areas, again, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden farms are going to be permitted. Again, it was just sort of like, could be suitable for aquaculture, but it's going to be up to the industry and the sector to determine whether or not they want to submit an application to go into those waterways. And Celia wanted me to let folks know that the draft programmatic environmental impact statements for Gulf of Mexico as well as Southern California Bight will be available in January at the latest, I believe. I don't know, it's not my territory, but that's what she says. Which would include any sort of applications related to shellfish, seaweed, and finfish. So it's basically an overview of these are the potential conflicts that we see. But it's gonna be up to the applicant to sort of work with their state regulatory agencies, but also their federal agencies in submitting an application to basically if they wanna establish a farm. So they have to go through the formal permitting process like everyone else. Next slide, please. And just want to leave you with some things to consider. I know it can get frustrating. We all love seaweed and we want to expand aquaculture, but again, it's not a one-size-fits-all process. Even in the state, and the state that I'm most familiar with is Connecticut. In our small little state, the grounds and growing areas are very different with different interactions, just within a small sector of the coastline. And so the agencies really have to review what's happening at that spot all year round. So that is why it's part of it's a very lengthy process. Now, some states have a formal permitting process, other states don't. So knowing that, I would highly recommend if you're interested in submitting an application or just understanding how the process works, reach out to your regional aquaculture coordinator, but most importantly, reach out to your sea grant program. I mean, they're the folks that have the most knowledge. They're also the non-advocate, so they're not pushing for anything. They're just going to give you the information. Whether you like it or not, that's the information. But you want that objective perspective to sort of help you understand the process. And be patient, ask lots of questions. Again, we're trying to grow aquaculture responsibly, but at the same time, there are going to be potential conflicts. So I'll just leave you with that. Thank you very much. Yeah, any questions? No, you don't want to talk to someone involved in regulations.
Well, everyone, thanks again to all the speakers for this industry session, and thank you all for being here. And hopefully now the next session is gonna start anytime soon. But yeah.